In the year 1867, Ashcombe was a quiet riverside town, where life moved predictably by day and at night. Whispers and rumors wandered like shadows along the cobblestone streets. In this town, a boy named Timothy Caldwell was born on a peculiar evening, when the rain fell so softly and evenly that the midwife later claimed it had paused to witness his birth. Timothy appeared ordinary at first glance, slight of frame, narrow shoulders, fair hair that refused to stay combed, but his eyes carried a strange intensity. They did not merely look. They observed, analyzed, and sought patterns in everything, as though he could read secrets that others overlooked. Timothy's father, a mill worker, had died beneath a timber beam when Timothy was only 6 years old. After that night, his mother, Eleanor Caldwell, never remarried. She often claimed that Timothy had changed after his father's death. The boy would stand silently beside the coffin and whisper, "The body remembers even when the man forgets." Nobody in Ashcombe understood what he meant. His childhood had seemed ordinary enough. He attended the local school, played with neighborhood children, and did chores. But a single incident altered everyone's perception of him. One afternoon, while running errands for his mother, Timothy slipped on the steep mill stairs. He fell hard, his head striking the iron edge of a step. Normally, a boy would bleed heavily and cry out in pain, but Timothy's wound bled only briefly before closing, as though stitched by invisible hands. The town's physician, Dr. Harrington, the oldest and most experienced doctor in Ashcombe, was summoned immediately. Upon examination, Harrington found no swelling, no fracture, and no fever. Timothy's pulse was steady, unnervingly so, almost as if the body itself defied natural law. Harrington stared in disbelief, whispering to himself, "I have never seen anything like this." Dr. Harrington could not dismiss what he had seen. A wound that should have required stitches had closed on its own, leaving behind skin that looked untouched by injury. Believing he might be mistaken, Harrington sent letters to 2 physicians from neighboring towns, asking them to visit Ashcombe under the excuse of professional consultation. When they arrived, Timothy sat patiently in the doctor's study, his hands folded, his expression calm and curious, rather than afraid. The doctors questioned him gently at first. They asked how he felt after the fall. Timothy answered simply, "Complete." When asked if he had felt pain, he tilted his head slightly and said, "Pain is only a message." There was no message to receive. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Children were not supposed to speak that way. They began their examinations. Warm metal was placed against his skin, then cold. Timothy reacted slowly, as if sensation traveled a longer path through his body. His pulse changed in subtle patterns depending on light and time of day, growing deeper and slower as evening approached. One doctor suggested hysteria, another coincidence, but neither could explain what they were recording. Stories about Timothy spread quickly. During winter, when fevers weakened other children, he never once fell ill. When a wagon collapsed on a trapped horse, Timothy helped lift it with a strength that did not match his thin arms. People began to notice that storms often arrived exactly when Timothy said they would. He would stand still, listening to the wind, and quietly tell his mother to bring the laundry inside. Most unsettling of all was the way Timothy spoke about the human body. He described organs not only by shape, but by behavior. He said the heart hesitated when a person lied, and the lungs tightened when grief was left unspoken. Eleanor insisted her son had never studied medicine. Their home held no books beyond a Bible and a household ledger. Timothy had never received formal education. Yet when Dr. Harrington tested him with Latin medical terms, Timothy corrected his pronunciation without hesitation. Science offered no answers. Religion offered too many. Ashcombe stood uneasily between fascination and fear. Some townspeople began to avoid Timothy entirely. Others watched him from a distance, whispering that he was not entirely human. The local minister warned Eleanor that her son might be a test of faith, or something darker. Eleanor replied firmly, "He is my child. Nothing more, nothing less." That night, stones struck the Caldwell home's windows. Symbols were carved into the mill door, charms meant to ward off evil. Timothy examined them quietly the next morning and said only, "They are poorly drawn." His calm response frightened people more than anger ever could. Ashcombe had begun to fear what it could not explain. As curiosity in Ashcombe turned slowly into fear, Dr. Harrington decided that rumor alone could not be allowed to define Timothy Caldwell. He arranged a series of controlled examinations in his private study, a narrow room lined with shelves of dried herbs, glass bottles and handwritten journals. Timothy agreed without hesitation. He showed no anxiety, no resistance, and no excitement, only a quiet interest, as though he were observing the doctors as closely as they observed him. The tests were simple at first. Timothy's reflexes were measured, his breathing counted, his heartbeat recorded at different hours of the day. The results were strange but consistent. His pulse did not follow the same patterns as other boys his age. There's a day. The tension in Ashcombe reached its breaking point the night. Dr. Harrington fell gravely ill. His breathing grew shallow, each inhale sounding like a struggle against something unseen pressing down on his chest. Conventional treatments failed. Poultices, tonics, and rest offered no relief. The older man, who had spent his life trusting reason and method, now lay helpless, gasping for air. Dr. Ellis hesitated before making his decision, knowing how the town already felt about Timothy Caldwell. But desperation overcame doubt. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ellis sent word to Eleanor Caldwell, asking that Timothy come at once. Timothy entered the study quietly, the lamplight casting long shadows across the walls. He looked at Dr. Harrington not with fear, but with deep concentration. After a moment, he asked a single question. "May I help?" Ellis nodded, unable to speak. Timothy placed one hand over Harrington's chest and closed his eyes. The room felt different almost immediately, as though the air itself had grown heavier, then slowly eased. Harrington's breathing steadied. Color returned to his face. Those watching felt an odd sensation pass through them, an awareness of memories not their own, griefs long buried, briefly surfacing and then settling back into silence. When Timothy stepped away, he swayed slightly, but did not fall. Harrington slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. No one spoke for a long moment. The next morning, Harrington awoke stronger, his fever gone. He tried to speak of what had happened, but words failed him. Instead, he looked at Timothy with a mixture of gratitude and unease. Science had not prepared him for what he had witnessed. That same day, Timothy began filling a small notebook with careful drawings and notes. He sketched organs unfamiliar to any medical text, structures, layered and interconnected, as though the human body were more complex than anyone had imagined. He labeled them in a precise script no one recognized. When asked what the drawings meant, Timothy answered only, "The body is a library. Most people never learn how to read it." Fear spread faster than understanding. By nightfall, Ashcombe no longer felt safe. Whispers turned into warnings. Doors were locked. Lamps were extinguished early. Timothy sensed the shift and said nothing. Before dawn, he packed nothing, left no message, and slipped quietly from the house. Eleanor awoke to an empty bed and an open door. Timothy Caldwell was never seen in Ashcombe again. But the questions he left behind lingered, unsettling the town long after his footsteps had vanished. Questions science could not yet answer, and perhaps was not ready to ask. After Timothy Caldwell vanished from Ashcombe, the town attempted to return to its familiar rhythm, but something essential had shifted. Doors still opened at dawn, the mill still turned, and the river still flowed. Yet an uneasiness lingered beneath daily routines. People avoided speaking Timothy's name in public, as though silence could erase what they had witnessed. When his name did surface, it was spoken softly, followed by nervous glances. Eleanor Caldwell remained in her small riverside home. She did not cry in public, nor did she demand answers from the doctors. When neighbors offered sympathy, she nodded politely and carried on. In private, she kept Timothy's room exactly as he had left it. His clothes were folded, his bed neatly made. She believed, with a certainty that surprised even her, that Timothy had not run away in fear. He had left because he knew it was time. Dr. Harrington recovered physically, but his mind never returned to its former certainty. He reread his notes obsessively, searching for errors, explanations, or patterns he might have missed. What troubled him most was not Timothy's abilities, but Timothy's calm acceptance of them. The boy had never asked why he was different. He had never claimed to be special. Within months, Harrington began corresponding with physicians outside Ashcombe. Carefully, cautiously. He asked if they had encountered patients who healed too well, children who sensed illness before symptoms appeared. Most replies dismissed the idea. A few, however, were oddly hesitant. The first letter arrived from a town several days' travel away. It described a young boy who had appeared during a winter outbreak of fever. The boy stayed only a week, helping where doctors failed, then left without explanation. No name was given, no description beyond quiet and observant. Harrington felt a chill reading it. More letters followed over the years. Different towns, different names, the same pattern. A boy who listened more than he spoke. A boy who touched the sick and seemed to understand not just their bodies, but their grief, their fear, their unspoken regrets. He never stayed long enough for questions to become demands. Dr. Ellis urged Harrington to publish his findings. Harrington refused. He knew that turning Timothy into a subject would invite pursuit, exploitation, and fear. Science, he realized, was not always gentle with what it did not understand. Meanwhile, Eleanor received no letters, no signs. Yet she felt Timothy's absence not as loss, but as distance. Sometimes, when illness passed through Ashcombe, she noticed how lightly it touched the town compared to others nearby. She wondered if Timothy's time there had changed something fundamental, leaving behind a kind of quiet protection. Years passed. Ashcombe aged. New children were born who never heard Timothy's story, but the doctors remembered. They aged too, carrying a secret that reshaped how they viewed every unexplained recovery. As science advanced, new theories emerged: nervous systems, subconscious response, psychosomatic healing. Harrington studied them all, hoping to find Timothy hidden between the lines. Yet none explained the boy's awareness, his understanding of emotion as physical force. One evening, Harrington admitted something to Ellis he had never written down. When Timothy had placed his hand over Harrington's chest, Harrington had not only felt relief, he had felt memory. His late wife's laughter, his own long-buried guilt, the weight he had carried unknowingly. Timothy had not healed lungs alone. He had eased a lifetime of tension. This realization frightened Harrington more than any medical mystery. If Timothy could access what the body stored beyond pain, then science had only scratched the surface of what it meant to be human. Reports of Timothy became rarer as time passed. Not because he had stopped, Harrington believed, but because he had learned to move more carefully. He appeared where suffering was quiet, where desperation did not attract crowds. He left before gratitude turned to dependence. To the world, Timothy Caldwell faded into obscurity. To Harrington, he became a reminder that knowledge carried responsibility and that some truths demanded restraint. In her later years, Eleanor Caldwell grew frail. On her final night, she spoke softly to an empty room, thanking Timothy for trusting her. She passed peacefully, with a faint smile on her face. Dr. Harrington attended her burial and stood longer than necessary by the grave, aware that with her passing, the last direct tie to Timothy was gone. Harrington lived long enough to see science grow bolder, more confident. Yet he never forgot the boy who had quietly stood beyond its reach. In his final journal entry, Harrington wrote that science was not diminished by mystery, it was guided by it. Somewhere, perhaps, Timothy continued to move through the world, unseen, unnamed. Not a miracle worker, not a myth, simply a presence where understanding was needed more than answers. And so the story of Timothy Caldwell remained unfinished, not because it lacked an ending, but because it had become something larger than a single life, an open question carried forward by those who had learned. Through him, how much there still was to learn. Decades passed, and the world changed in ways Timothy Caldwell could never have predicted, yet somehow seemed to understand. Science advanced rapidly. New instruments could peer inside the human body, revealing structures once hidden. Diseases that had once been death sentences were now studied, named, and treated. And yet, every generation of doctors encountered cases that refused to fit neatly into textbooks. Patients who healed too quickly. Wounds that closed without explanation. Recoveries that felt guided rather than accidental. Dr. Harrington did not live to see all of this, but his journals did. Years after his death, a young medical researcher uncovered them in an archive, drawn by the careful handwriting and unusual observations. The name Timothy Caldwell appeared again and again, always followed by hesitation rather than conclusion. The researcher dismissed the entries at first as products of a less disciplined age. But one detail disturbed him. Similar unexplained cases continued to surface even in modern hospitals. In scattered reports across continents, there were mentions of a quiet individual who arrived during crises and vanished afterward. Sometimes described as young, sometimes ageless, always calm. No photographs ever captured him clearly. No records held his name. Those who met him struggled to describe his face, yet remembered how they felt afterward, lighter, steadier, as if something inside them had been gently realigned. The researcher began to suspect that Timothy Caldwell had never truly been confined to a single era. Perhaps what made him impossible to explain was not biology alone, but timing. He appeared when knowledge lagged behind need, filling the gap briefly before moving on. In the end, Timothy's story resisted a traditional conclusion. There was no final discovery, no revelation that placed him neatly within scientific law. Instead, he became a quiet influence, shaping how some doctors approach their work. Those who read Harrington's journals learned to listen longer, to observe more carefully, and to respect what could not yet be measured. Occasionally, in moments of doubt, a physician would recall a line from the journals, "The body is a library and pain is its language." These words reminded them that healing was not always about control, but understanding. Whether Timothy Caldwell still walked the world, or whether he had been something unique to his time, no one could say for certain. But his legacy endured, not as a miracle to be proven, nor a mystery to be feared, but as a reminder that science was not weakened by its limits. It was defined by them. And somewhere at the edge of knowledge, the question he left behind remained quietly alive, waiting for a future ready to ask it properly.